Evan, I know you. I know you didn't get to talk about this yesterday, and I feel like this is a very deep subject because it can cross multiple sports,
Mm.
and arguably you'll have this probably more in NBA because I don't see guys going out and playing pickup football games and possibly like a pickup baseball game, just going to the park or whatever. Chet Holmgren is going to miss the entire season. The number 3 overall pick possibly was going to go number 1 overall to Orlando. Reportedly, he purposely bombed his tryout with them so they would not draft him. But he was guarding LeBron James at the crossover Pro-Am in Seattle over last weekend. And he tore ligaments in his foot, and he's going to miss the entire season. Which is a problem for the NBA, right? Because
karma's a B.
Right? It's a problem. Which makes it okay. Now, if you're Adam Silver and you're the commissioner, who I think Adam Silver is probably the best commissioner in all of professional sports. I think he's the most in tune with the fans. He's most in tune with how the NBA should be run versus how players are trying to run it now. Because you see a lot of guys like they want to have load management and this, that, and the other, and he's like, no, you're getting paid millions of dollars. You're going to play your contracted amount of games. Unless there's something like the state of New York, like Kyrie Irving can't play because he doesn't want to get vaccinated. Like you can't force somebody to get vaccinated.
Right.
And state laws are state laws. State laws supersede NBA laws. Right? Like that's why Deshaun Watson's thing is what it is. The current CBA runs through 23-24. So it runs through the end of next season. What do you do if you are Adam Silver? Like, do you sit there and go, all right, so anything off season, if it's not an NBA entity, you cannot participate because that's difficult.
I think what teams would have to do in situations like this is I think it has to come down to contract stipulations.
Right.
Especially if you're paying that player X amount of dollars, which since he was a high draft pick, you're paying him some monies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an organization kind of contract deal because when it comes down to the commission, he can kind of suggest that. But if you're trying to mandate it as is, well, you can't do this outside of the league. You can't go play street ball or you can't do these types of tournaments outside of the NBA. It's almost like saying, well, we have a leash on you. You can't do this. You can't do that. I think that it has to come down to is when you're being brought over to an organization is, okay, these are our contract stipulations outside of our team. You cannot like do these like street ball events or you can't do these events because of the high risk or the risk of injury happening. And then, us losing you as a player. And then, or you can put it in the contract. If you do these tournaments, if you get injured, you forfeit this amount of money for that year. Because look, I get it. I mean, a lot of these guys get restless during the year. They get invited to these camps and to these tournaments but is that your job? Like, is that who's paying you? You really, I think also as a player, you really have to be responsible about that is, okay, I'm risking my money and I'm risking my playing time by doing this small tournament.
Right.
Like if I was a player personally, I wouldn't risk it because there is that chance which he just did. He's just kind of messed up his year of playing is, I'm putting that high risk out there of getting hurt. Just like guys that do, they play these charity tournaments where they can, run the risk of just pulling like a hammy or pulling or shattering their knee just by, even though it's not really like full contact, but you can still tweak something while you're out there.
Right.
So as an organization, as a president of a company, I would be like, look, we're going to put in the contract that you can do these things. But if you do these things and you injure yourself, you are forfeiting this year of pay.
I think to me it makes it difficult because actually Andrew in the chat it's
a great question. It's a great question.
What I was going to jump into is
I think so too because it impacts players too as well because listen, you get invited to the Olympics, you can ultimately say no.
Right.
And once again, look, you run the risk of, are the Olympics paying you? Do the Olympics have your contract? it's all great and all, but you're running the risk of injuring yourself. So as a player, again, you really have to say, what is more important to me? Is it my playing in my contract, or is it going out and playing for a gold medal? Is the gold medal going to pay my bills? Is the gold medal going to help me and my family out when it comes to these types of things? Like, that's what you really have to. It's almost like, are you mature enough to really think about the business aspect of being a professional athlete?
Sure. So, like, if I look at, and I'll use the Olympics as an example, the NHL does not allow NHL players to participate in the Olympics, but that's an NHL directive.
Right.
So does the NBA go as far as saying, like, hey, you can't participate in the Olympics? Because you can get injured in FIBA, right? We saw Paul George shatter his leg at a Team USA scrimmage, or a blue and white scrimmage against his own teammates. He shattered his leg, missed his entire season, arguably took a year and a half, 2 years to come back to look like the Paul George prior to that injury.
I think one good example is the Major League Baseball, where the Major League Baseball is a lot of these international tournaments where you don't see a lot of the high profile guys play. Like, you mostly, like, especially in the Olympics, they mostly had college players play on the U.S. men's Olympic team for baseball. You don't see the high profile players go because they know there's a risk of playing in a tournament like this. So,
right.
I mean, Andrew brings up a great question. It's like, well, would that impact players in the Olympics? Yeah, it impacts the same. The Olympics is another tournament. That's not an NBA affiliated tournament. This is the Olympics. This is like the N1 tournaments or the street ball tournaments that these guys play on the offseason. It's just another tournament. It's not your job.
What about, so things that, like, don't, and I'm gonna use it this, I'm gonna phrase it this way: things that don't matter to an NBA season, right? Summer league doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter.
Preseason doesn't really matter. Skills competition, dunk competition, all-star game, those things don't matter, but they're NBA entities. So if I, and I said this yesterday, but if I blow out my ACL and I'm playing in the skills competition during All-Star Weekend, is that really any different than if I am going and playing a pickup game and blow out my ACL? Because it still negatively affects the season.
I think it has a little bit of difference too, because in the All-Star Weekend with these skills challenges, they're not going as hard as they would to these tournaments that they're doing off season.
That's
like
fair.
for the dunk, like even in the All-Star game, these guys are really playing slow basketball. They're not going hard at the All-Star game. They're not putting hard fouls on each other. They're doing ticky-tack, types of things in the All-Star game. Just like in the skills competition. You're not going as hard as you would at a regular game. And also, if you're playing in one of these outside charity events or these tournaments where you're going hard, you're not. That's why the risk is so high. When it comes to All-Star Weekend, you could opt out of this. You don't have to do it.
Which is largely why we've never seen LeBron James participate in the dunk contest.
Exactly.
You can say what you want, maybe financials, whatever, but like there is that risk of injury if you participate. Like, you've got to jump over. We've seen Aaron Gordon do it. We've seen Blake Griffin do it. You got to jump over cars and everything. And that's why, like, you can literally hurt yourself. Like, could you imagine not jumping the right time and your knee goes through a car window? You know what I mean? Like, you're in some serious trouble if that happens. But then again, like I said, you're getting injured. Like, can the NBA say, well, hey, you got injured in a non-NBA game, now we're going to have to fine you, you're going to forfeit your money? Because that also does not have any direct effect on your team winning a championship and competing for a title. So it's such a fine line of things that you have to cross, where you're like, all right, so if the NBA can make these requests, what do the players request in return? Like,
right. I also think too, Danny, when it comes to the All-Star Weekend and like the skills challenge and the dunk contest and all that stuff, I think that's protected for those players doing that too. When it's inside the NBA, you're protected. When it's outside the NBA, when it's not NBA, like, sponsored by the NBA, or it's not NBA affiliated, like, then you're not protected. But if you get injured during the All-Star game, I'm sure they're going to protect you when it comes to contract and your job wise. But when it's not affiliated with the NBA, then you run the risk of losing all that.
Right. Which possible, like, and
I'm sure it definitely is possible because look, if it happens inside the NBA bubble, you're good. You're okay. Outside of it, it's fair game, man. It's you run that risk.
See, like, and this is where I go, okay, well, where is the line drawn? Because how many times in the offseason do you see like, oh, Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp met up in Miami for an offseason workout? Or what, you know what I mean? Like, we used to hear Deshaun Watson and somebody used to meet up all the time for offseason workouts, like a different wide receiver from another team. And you're like, I didn't even like realize that they were friends, whatever. And then you're like, okay, so let's say Paulo Banchero and LeBron James meet up for an offseason workout. Is that now frowned upon? Because you have to let athletes be athletes. They have to like do something in the offseason because the NBA offseason is just it's dead.
Right.
And we don't really hear about these guys met up, and not all NBA players can afford their own entourage of personal trainers like superstars can.
But aren't off-season workouts different than doing an actual like full-on tournament though? Like workouts to me is, you're going at half speed almost. You're not going full speed.
Right. But you could also argue that a lot of times if you're getting injured, it's when you're going half speed.
That's true too. And I also think too, when these athletes are doing like off-season workouts, I'm sure they're letting their teams know, their organizations know is, hey, I'm going to be doing this at this point in time here. I'm doing it with this. I'm doing it with this trainer. So as long as it's such a weird situation too, because, you could be protected with your team, but if you do these off the field things where you're just off sponsored thing, or I'm doing this that's not affiliated with the NFL or the NBA or the MLB, but you're doing it on your own time. Like, I think it all comes down to the contract. Like, this is what I have in my contract. If this happens when I'm not in my full uniform, am I protected? I think it just comes down to the contract stipulations, where I think all professional athletes should have that. I'm sure they have it somewhere in their contract. Like, look, if I have an off-season workout and I get injured, I'm protected for my contract. Or if I'm doing an off-season tournament and I get injured, this is the protectability I have for my contract and my monies. I'm sure it's in there. It has to be in there because I'm sure contracts are like books, man. They're like this big when it comes to the jargon that they have to do. So I'm sure if you have a great agent, your agent's going to put in there, my client will be doing this charity event, or he's going to be doing this. If he gets injured, his money is guaranteed. It's not going to be
because my money is guaranteed.
Yeah, exactly.
But so like here's the interesting dynamic, and I'll use the NHL as an example because the NBA does the same thing, right? But I'm going to use the NHL as the example because they don't allow their players to play in the Olympics, but 90% of the guys that are drafted continue to play college. They continue to play in their European leagues for 1, 2, 3, 4 years before you even see them in the NHL. And they're playing in they're not playing in NHL affiliated leagues. You look at who just won the rookie, that was Sider from Detroit. This was his rookie year, but he wasn't just drafted this year. He was playing in Europe before, like full contact, full season, competing for a title. And you're like, so he's allowed to do that. But when his country's Olympic committee calls and they say, hey, do you want to play? You're like, no, you're not going to play in that. Like, what's the difference? Because it's basically exhibition versus exhibition. If you're looking at it from an NHL standpoint, yeah, you're going to get better if you're playing in your European league, but you're also going to get better if you're playing in a world league as well. It's a weird dynamic, and same thing can be said for NBA. Like, remember when Ricky Rubio was like this huge prospect coming out? The Minnesota Timberwolves drafted him, and he didn't play in the NBA for like 3 years.
Yeah, I remember that. It's like, okay,
and everybody kept going, yeah, when's he coming? When's he going to play? Oh, he's not coming this season. Oh, he's not coming this season. And then he finally comes to the league. He's just decent, but like, you ran the risk of this guy getting injured for multiple seasons. right? And I know that this was a little, this was I guess it was a long time ago at this point now, but and I know things change, but you can only go with what you know.
Right.
Like that's the weird dynamic and the weird drawing of the line is like when you've got a global property such as the NBA, just like the NHL and the NFL now, because the NFL is doing games all over the world. The NBA's got 4 games outside of the United States this season, and outside of North America. We'll say that because obviously they have games in Canada and Toronto, but they've got games in Japan. They've got games in England. They've got games in Germany. They've got games all over the world. And they're like, if you are not allowing like Luka Doncic goes and plays in his home league in the offseason, if you're not allowing him to do that, do you think the excitement as high as it possibly could be if you're allowing him to play and you're allowing him to participate and save face and grow the attraction in his country? Because then you're looking at a team where you're like, yeah, I mean, he normally plays on this when the game comes, but he's not allowed to play here anymore. I'm not that excited anymore. So it's such a fine line to where I totally get it from an NBA standpoint. Hey, you can't play in these because we've already seen it in the NHL to an extent. And that's where you go, all right, so if I'm a player, like what am I asking for in my collective bargaining agreement, which comes up at the end of next season, not the coming season, but the following season? What am I asking for in return of you saying, hey, you can't participate in this, you can't participate in that, and you can't do this? Like, what exactly are we looking for? And what are we doing? Because it's getting to the point almost where it's a problematic situation to where you're not going to allow players. You don't want these guys to get rusty. And just like summer league, your superstars don't play. Your starters don't play in summer league. Your starters largely don't play in the preseason either. So these guys are going to get rusty unless we're going to start offering like league sponsored training sessions in the off season. Like, hey, here's we have voluntary workouts all summer long. You can participate if you want. You don't have to participate if you don't want to. But we're like, I don't know, man. It's like I would wreck you in a Little Tykes dunk contest, Evan.
Oh yeah, you think so? You think so?
Absolutely. I would jump over a Power Wheels. Blake Griffin, no, me. Kia Optima, no thank you.
Big Power Wheels, baby. I'll stack up little kiddie pools and I will jump over those.
Oh. What will they be filled with?
Pudding.
Dog poop.
No. What's the matter with you?
I mean, it would be more fun if you fell in dog poop than chocolate pudding.
No, it would not. It would not be. No.
For all of us, it would
for
be.
All of you, yes, but for me, no.
Keep me away from the pool.
Orbeez. I jump into a pool full of Orbeez.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
We can do that. But it's a weird situation. And I'm interested to see how it does play out because it's something that is going to, I would assume it's going to be addressed because it's not ever really been talked about. And now, we've seen multiple instances outside of the NBA where a guy has gotten injured and missed a large amount of time, if not a full season, which does affect your business at the end of the day, right? And as the commissioner of any sport, your number one job is to protect your business. And that's what you do, right?
I think also, too, as players as well, you have to be business mindset is I'm protecting my brand.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, once you stop playing, like, how is your brand doing? Like, how much money do you have for your brand? Mm-hmm. So you obviously, as a pro athlete, you're risking everything every single day. Even by going to the grocery store, you're risking something.
Right.
But protecting yourself at the end of the day, after your time in the league is over, how did you protect yourself, and how did you become financially safe outside of this league when the league is done with you? I think that's what a lot of players' mindsets should be: is am I going to be okay once my playing time is over?